Imagine for a moment that you are standing in a high-security vault. In front of you, stacked from the floor to the ceiling, is $10 billion in cold, hard cash. It is a staggering amount of wealth. It is enough to build aircraft carriers. It is enough to fund small nations. But next to that mountain of money, sitting on a simple steel table, is a small glass jar. Inside the jar is a dull, grayish powder. It looks like dust you might sweep off a garage floor. To the average person, the mountain of cash represents ultimate power. But to a guidance system engineer at Lockheed Martin or a strategic planner in the Kremlin, the money is just paper. The gray powder is the only thing in that room that matters. That powder is refined neodymium oxide, and without it, the most advanced fighter jets in the world do not fly. Without it, the silent killers of the deep, the nuclear submarines, become deaf and blind. Without it, the guidance fins on a hypersonic missile cannot steer. We are currently witnessing one of the most significant shifts in the global balance of power since the collapse of the Soviet Union. But this shift is not happening with tanks crossing borders. It is not happening with politicians shaking hands at high-profile summits. It is happening in the chemical processing plants that turn raw earth into the technological nervous system of the 21st century. Russia has just placed a $10 billion bet to break the West's stranglehold on high-tech warfare. They have announced a massive mobilization of capital to unlock their frozen treasures in the Arctic. But there is a problem that no amount of money can solve overnight. There is a secret black box of technology that stands between digging rocks out of the ground and building a modern weapon. For 30 years, the United States and its allies let that key slip through their fingers, and now that key is being handed from Beijing to Moscow. This is not just a story about mining. This is the story of why the West is in a state of quiet panic. Welcome to the new era of resource warfare. Let's look at the map. If you scroll north, past the sprawling forests of Siberia, into the frozen wasteland of the Arctic Circle, you will find a place called Tomtor. Geologists call this place the King of Rare Earths. It is a place where the ground is permanently frozen. The temperatures drop to levels that can shatter steel. It is one of the most inhospitable places on Earth. But underneath that ice lies a treasure trove that dwarfs anything found in the United States. According to the US Geological Survey, Russia sits on confirmed reserves of nearly 4 million tons of rare earth elements. Some Russian government estimates put that number as high as 12 million tons. To put that in perspective, the United States holds less than 2 million tons. Russia has double, perhaps triple, the raw potential of America. It is a sleeping giant. For decades, this giant has been in a coma. Why? Why would a country with such immense wealth leave it buried in the ice for 40 years? The answer is what economists call the resource curse, but specifically the curse of oil. For the last half-century, Moscow did not need to innovate. They had oil. They had natural gas. The business model was simple. You drill a hole. The black gold comes out. You put it in a pipeline. And the cash flows in immediately. It was easy. It was fast. It required very little complex processing compared to modern metallurgy. Developing a rare earth industry is the opposite of easy. It is slow. It is incredibly dirty. And it is scientifically excruciating. So, while the world moved from the industrial age to the digital age, Russia stayed comfortably in the petroleum age. They were content to let their rare earth production languish at barely 2% of the global share. They were content to buy their magnets and their electronics from China or the West. But then came 2022. Then came the sanctions. Then came the realization that without these metals, you cannot build a modern military independent of your enemies. Vladimir Putin signed a decree that effectively declared a state of emergency for the mineral sector. The goal is aggressive. They want to reduce their dependence on rare earth imports from 75% down to 45% by 2030. They are aiming for a production target of 50,000 tons per year. That is a massive leap from where they are today. It is a mobilization of capital we haven't seen since the Soviet-era industrial drives. 700 billion rubles are being poured into this sector. Western analysts look at this and they see the money, but they are missing the point, because you can have all the money in the world. and you can have all the ore in the ground. But you still have a broken chain. Mining is the easy part. I know that sounds ridiculous to say about digging in the frozen Arctic, but in this industry, it is true. Any nation with a shovel and a dump truck can mine ore. The United States mines rare earths at Mountain Pass in California. Australia mines them at Mount Weld. Vietnam mines them. But mining only gets you a rock. It gets you a concentrate mixed with dirt and 17 different elements, all fused together. Separating them is where the war is lost. This is the black box. This is the technology gap that $10 billion cannot bridge in a year, or even 5 years. Let me explain the science of this. Because it is crucial to understanding the geopolitical threat. Rare earth elements are chemically promiscuous. They love to stick together. In the periodic table, the lanthanides are all clustered together because they share very similar electron structures. Separating neodymium from praseodymium is like trying to unbake a cake and get the flour back from the eggs. They have almost identical atomic weights. They behave almost identically in chemical reactions. You cannot just melt the rock and skim off the metal like you do with iron or copper. To separate them, you need a process called solvent extraction. Imagine a factory floor the size of 10 football fields. This floor is filled with thousands of mixer-settler tanks. First, you dissolve the rock in strong acid. Then, you run it through a specific organic solvent. This solvent is designed to grab one specific element just slightly more than the others. You run it through once. You get a separation of maybe 0.01%. So you do it again, and again, and again. For some high-purity elements needed for lasers or missile guidance, you might have to repeat this process thousands of times in a continuous cascade. It requires a level of chemical engineering precision that is mind-boggling. It requires specific proprietary blends of solvents. If the temperature is off by a degree, the batch is ruined. If the acidity levels fluctuate, the separation fails. And there is another cost. It generates a massive amount of toxic, radioactive waste. Thorium and uranium are often found alongside rare earths. Processing them creates lakes of acidic sludge. This is why the West stopped doing it in the 1990 seconds. We didn't want the pollution. We didn't want the environmental regulations. We didn't want the cancer villages. So we outsourced it. We outsourced it to the only country willing to pay that price, China. Over the last 30 years, China didn't just become the world's factory for plastic toys. They quietly became the world's laboratory for rare earth processing. They have graduated tens of thousands of PhDs, specifically in rare earth chemistry. They have tweaked and perfected the solvent formulas. They hold the patents. They hold the know-how. Today, China controls 90% of the global processing capacity. 90%. Think about the implications of that monopoly. Even the ore that the United States mines in California has to be shipped across the ocean to China to be processed, because the United States literally forgot how to do it efficiently. And now, Russia is knocking on China's door. This is the nightmare scenario for the Pentagon. Russia has the raw materials that can last for centuries. China has the black box technology to turn that dirt into gold. If Beijing hands Moscow the keys to the kingdom, if they transfer the solvent extraction technology and the industrial equipment to Siberia, the game changes instantly. It bypasses the need for Russia to spend 20 years reinventing the wheel. It instantly creates a second superpower in the rare earth supply chain. And this supply chain leads directly to the battlefield. Let's talk about the hardware. Let's talk about why the Pentagon is watching this specific deal so closely. Modern warfare is not about who has the most soldiers. It is about who has the best magnets. I am not joking. Rare earth permanent magnets are the heart of modern kinetic power. Take the F-35 Lightning II. This is the crown jewel of American air superiority. It is a flying computer. To build just one F-35, you need 417 kilograms of rare earth materials. That is nearly half a ton of refined metal. Where does it go? It goes into the actuators that move the control surfaces on the wings. It goes into the targeting lasers. It goes into the electronic warfare suite. It goes into the AESA radar system that allows the jet to see the enemy before the enemy sees it. And, most critically, it goes into the engine. To make a jet fighter capable of vertical takeoff and supersonic cruise, you need motors and generators that are incredibly powerful but incredibly light. Only rare earth magnets can do that. Specifically, magnets made with neodymium and doped with dysprosium. Dysprosium is the magic dust. It allows the magnet to operate at extreme temperatures without losing its magnetic field. Inside a jet engine, it is hot. Without dysprosium, the magnets fail. Without the magnets, the actuators fail. Without the actuators, the F-35 is just a very expensive glider. Now look at the ocean. The Virginia-class nuclear submarine, the Silent Hunter. Each one of these leviathans requires 4 tons of rare earth materials. 4 tons. It is in the propulsion motors that drive the ship silently through the water. It is in the sonar arrays that listen for enemy ships. It is in the communication devices. And it is in the Tomahawk missiles sitting in the launch tubes. Every guidance fin on a missile needs a tiny, high-powered motor to steer it at supersonic speeds. That motor needs rare earths. So, what happens if the supply chain breaks? What happens if China decides to weaponize its 90% market share? We don't have to guess. We have seen previews of this movie. In 2010, after a dispute over the Senkaku Islands with Japan, China quietly halted rare earth exports. The Japanese tech industry went into immediate cardiac arrest. Prices skyrocketed. Panic ensued. Japan had to scramble to find alternatives, but the damage was done. Now imagine that on a global scale, targeting the US military-industrial base. The strategic stockpiles in the West are classified, but estimates suggest they would last months, not years. You cannot print more dysprosium. You cannot code your way out of a shortage of neodymium. If the pipeline stops, the assembly line for the F-35 stops. It is that simple, and this is where the Russia-China alliance becomes an existential threat to Western military dominance. If they create a closed-loop system, Russian mines feeding Chinese refineries feeding Russian and Chinese weapons factories, they become immune to external pressure. They become immune to sanctions. They secure a supply of hypersonic missiles and stealth fighters that is theoretically unlimited, while the West is scrambling to permit new mines and struggling to relearn the chemistry of separation. This brings us to the geopolitical masterstroke happening right now in the Republic of Tuva. This is a remote region in southern Siberia. It is isolated, it is rugged, it is right on the border with Mongolia, and it is rich in lithium and rare earths. Reports indicate that negotiations are underway for a massive infrastructure deal. The deal is classic Chinese statecraft. China will build the railways. China will build the bridges. China will build the processing centers. In exchange, they get access to the minerals. This is the resources for infrastructure model that China has perfected in Africa, now applied to a nuclear superpower. They are looking at the Kuragino-Kyzyl railway line. This is not just a train track, it is an artery. It connects the vast mineral wealth of the Russian interior directly to the industrial heartland of China. It bypasses the ocean. It bypasses the choke points that the US Navy controls. It creates a land-based supply chain that is sanctions-proof. For Russia, this is a way to monetize their resources without using the US dollar. For China, it is a strategic reserve that no naval blockade can touch. And for the West, it is a signal that the era of economic leverage is ending. We have spent years thinking that sanctions could cripple the Russian war machine. We thought that denying them high-tech chips would stop them. But while we were focused on microchips, they were securing the periodic table. The West is now waking up to a harsh reality. Money is not wealth. Resources are wealth. Technology is wealth. The United States has spent the last 2 decades financializing its economy. We built apps. We built financial derivatives. We built service industries. China spent the last 2 decades industrializing its supply chain. They built mines. They built refineries. They built the physical capacity to make things. Now, those 2 timelines are converging. The $10 billion Russia is investing is just the entry fee. The real asset is the partnership with the one country that holds the keys to the black box. So, where does this leave us? we are seeing a bifurcation of the world. On one side, the G7 nations. They are trying to rush environmental permits. They are trying to subsidize new refineries. They are trying to catch up on 30 years of lost time. On the other side, the BRICS alliance, led by Russia and China, they are consolidating control over the physical building blocks of the future. This is not just about electric vehicles or wind turbines anymore. This is about the ability to wage war and sustain a defense industrial base. As we look at the F-35 seconds sitting on the tarmac, we have to ask ourselves a difficult question. Are we comfortable with the fact that the heart of our most advanced weapon system depends on a supply chain controlled by our strategic rivals? The panic in the West is justified, because for the first time in history, we are facing an opponent who can outproduce us in the raw materials of war. This is the reality of the black box, and right now, the other side has the key. But there is one specific element in this mix that is even more critical than the rest. One metal that is the Achilles heel of the entire US Air Force. It is called dysprosium. And the situation with dysprosium is far more precarious than even the general rare earth shortage. If you want to understand why this single element could ground the American fleet, you need to understand the thermal limits of modern magnets. I am going to break down the dysprosium crisis in our next report. It is a story of heat, physics, and a near-total monopoly that nobody is talking about. Make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss that analysis. The chessboard is moving, and the pieces are made of rare earth metals. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one. The Strategist out.